Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Cooley. Super excited that you're here to learn how to raise money. Pitching is not an easy thing. So I want to demystify a couple things for you, give you some tips and tricks, so that you have a better 10-minute pitch. So let's get into it. So let's start off proper. The first thing you need to know is that investors want to put money into your company. It's how they make more money. So if you're talking to people, that's because they're interested in what you're doing. A lot of us, especially when we get turned down, are like, oh, they don't want to invest. They don't want to invest. They don't do that. But actually they do. That's why they're taking the meeting. So keep that in mind. You're already walking into this conversation with a yes on your plate. Everything you do from the beginning to the end gets them to say no. Second thing, investors are smart. You don't know what they've done in their past. You don't know their hobbies typically. So give them the benefit of the doubt when you're going to raise capital that they might know a little bit something about business, maybe even your industry. So just assume that they're smart. Keep the pitch high level-ish. One of the things that we see a lot is people go really deep into the weeds, especially in medical technology. So keep the pitch high level because you want them to ask questions, which is point number 4. Questions are a good thing. Especially in these Zoom calls lately, if you're not getting questions, typically they're either not paying attention or they're really not interested. So questions are good. And by keeping it high level, you can get to questions. Number 5, do not memorize your pitch. It's a conversation. I'm going to teach you how to do that. But when you memorize, and we've seen this in Shark Tank, if you memorize your pitch and then you forget, you get really flustered and it makes the whole conversation feel really weird. So don't try and memorize your pitch. And again, I'll show you how to do that. Do not use animations. A lot of people want to have, those animations are like when the screen zooms in or does like a weird thing, or like a word will pop up. We're not magicians. We're just asking for capital. So don't do anything fancy. Just get in there, show them what's going on. A lot of times what happens in this case is it throws off your cadence. And if you're really not a stellar presenter, it can really mess you up. And then finally, your story, your pitch should flow like a story. And I'm going to teach you how to do that right now. So first things first, every slide answers a question. So a very single question. And imagine that this is a conversation between you and the investor. They're going to ask you a question and then you're going to reply. And these are implied questions, right? So let's start off with the very first question. Why are you here? In certain groups, they actually like to have like a summary slide of why you're even in the room in the first place. So, a short description of the company and what it does. If you decide to use a summary slide like this, which I highly recommend, don't spend much time on here, less than like maybe 10, 15 seconds at the most. So real quick, hi, this is what we do. We're raising, $5 million and move on. So what problem needs to be solved? And, that's the next question that the investors are going to ask. And in your brain, you're like, thanks for asking. Let me tell you. So here's a really clean format to use. There's 2 things you want to do here. The first one is connect you, the presenter, to the problem that you found. So if, for example, you are the one who had like an ankle injury and there was no ankle braces out there, then it would make sense why you have this problem. If you are part of something else, so like let's say you were hired on as a CEO or whatever, just do your best to connect yourself to the problem that it's at hand. Like, for example, like my friend had this issue and I knew I could help grow this business. And then what you want to do is use data, so some data points to prove that other people, not just yourself or not just your friend, have this same problem. Okay, the second question here, how do you solve that problem? Okay, very simple. You really want these 2 slides to mirror each other. So if I have this problem, then you're going to demonstrate how the solution solves that problem. A lot of people get these 2 slides wrong. So be very intentional about focusing on these 2 areas. You should be spending the most amount of your time in your presentation in the problem and the solution part, but not too much time, just enough to get the information. You want to show how the solution solves the problem. So whether bring in the product, demo it if you can. If it takes a while to demo, just use pictures. I highly recommend not using video. The majority of us raising capital are not videographers. And sometimes we could spend a lot of time on a video that's not very effective when really a photo could have done the job. All right, the third part, how do you get paid? A lot of people will take these 3 slides, problem, solution, and business model, and mix them all up and through their presentation. I really recommend to do these things first, because it's like, okay, I see why this thing is needed. I see who's going to buy the product, and I know how much they're going to pay. That solves a lot of questions in the investor's brain right up front. And when you're doing your business model, keep it really simple. It costs this much, or we sell it for this much and it costs this much. And you can add some supporting details if you need to. The third question. Okay, well, that's cool. I see it. I get it. The problem makes sense. The solution makes sense. I see how much you're charging. So what's the future look like? This is a financial projection slide. These can look many different ways. This is easily the simplest version of this, and I highly recommend the simplest version. A lot of people want to put a full pro forma on here. 100% not necessary. It actually creates more problems than solutions. So just keep it fairly simple, and then move on. You don't want to spend a lot of time here. This slide actually can make or break a presentation. And it's weird because nobody really cares. No one can predict year 5. But if you make some weird number assumptions here, you can actually kill your chances of getting funded. All right, the next question. Okay, so if it's such a great opportunity, how many people might buy this? So now this is your market assessment slide. TAM stands for total addressable market. SAM is serviceable addressable market, and then SOM is service obtainable market. If you're struggling on this slide, which a lot of people do, 2 things to keep in mind. One is make sure your units make sense. So for example, if you're selling like a medical product, and then you talk about a hospital with a certain number of beds, that might not make too much sense. But if you're talking about a number of procedures that happen, that makes much more sense, and you should be able to correlate those. As you move through and you get towards your SOM, the SOM is literally the person you're going to pick up the phone and call to buy the thing. So anybody is your TAM. Anybody who could potentially use your product is the TAM. But the person you're going after today in this presentation is your SOM. And that should be some percentage of the other thing. And a big thing to note is if these 2 slides, the business or the financial projection slide and the SOM aren't correlated, it can make you look really like you don't know what you're doing. So be very careful with your numbers here. If everything you're doing is always $1 billion industry, really check and make sure that that's a true statement. All right, so obviously this is a great idea. Obviously it can make money. So that means other people are doing it. So tell me, so who else is doing something similar? This is a competition slide. Lots of people do these differently. But to be honest, a very simple check system can actually work the best because we're comparing features right now. We don't know much about your competitors anyways. So I always like to say this is an I love me slide. So make sure that your features outperform the other ones. And also on this slide, you also want to reiterate the features that were being addressed by your solution in the problem. So for example, like there's no ankle braces that support lateral movement. Well, then the feature would be lateral movement support. So you want to make sure that these things are connected back to the beginning. All right, so what have you done so far as a business? And this is a simple traction slide. You want to make sure that these are major milestones for the development of the company. So it could be beta launch tests, beta launches, X number of clients so far, whatever is major to the company. I don't really care if you brought on a sales guy. That's not super important, but it's like we got our first 10 customers or hit $1 million in sales or whatever, like whatever major milestones have happened up to today. That's what you want to put here. And then, so what's next, obviously? Well, glad you asked. Here's what we're doing from today moving forward. And in this case, you also want to mention what you're doing moving forward with funding. So these are the milestones you plan to accomplish with funding. All right, so who's going to make this happen? This is your lovely team slide. A lot of people mess this slide up. It's not that important, but it's also super important at the same time, which I know doesn't make much sense. But what's ends up happening on a slide like this is I'm looking to make sure that your team is well-rounded. You have all the major components I think you need at least today, or I'm looking to see what's missing. So for example, let's say you're an e-commerce play and you're doing okay, but you really don't have somebody on your team who's grown a company to $30 million. Like I want to see that in an advisory role, or you're saying like, look, with the funding, we're actually going to be hiring this new position. We may even have them selected. We're just waiting for the funding. Another issue that happens on the team slide is people spend way too much time talking about the people about what they've done and accomplished and where they went to school. And it's not super important. The second part of that is the advisory people. A lot of people want to talk about their advisors. Most of the time we have no idea who they are. And then another thing that's happening here as well is that unless an advisor has actually put funding in your company, they're really not that important from an investor's point of view. Like, again, unless that advisor is filling a critical role, let's say this e-com role that we just mentioned, then they're much more valuable to mention. But if they're just an advisor, they're not that important as far as this conversation about pitching your business goes today. All right, so now all investors want to know, how do you get their return? And so what you're going to do here is you have two things you need to do. You can communicate all the companies that have been acquired, and then other companies that might acquire you based off of similar industry or whatever. So you just kind of want to tell me what you're thinking about as far as an exit is concerned. And then finally, this is the ask slide. So what you want to do on the ask slide is remind everybody what's happened over the last 10 minutes. So, hi, my name's Tim. Thank you guys for listening. This is what our product does. We're seeking, $5 million. Here's the terms. This is what we're going to use the funding for. And these are the major milestones that we're going after. And if you notice, like a lot of this is just repeating what you did. But again, it's been a while, right? We've been listening intently. So you're just pulling it all back to remind me what it is you're asking for. And what you're going to do in a lot of people, because we're used to presenting in school and things like that, this is your last slide, not a thank you slide, not a whatever slide. You want this to be your last slide because typically this slide gets the most airtime because again, you're just standing there answering questions and you're reminding the entire audience what you just talked about. So as they're reading through this over and over again, it might trigger a moment where they're like, oh man, I'd like to know more about whatever. And then you can obviously answer the question. But this should be your last slide, no thank you slides, okay? So with that being said, I am gonna end on a thank you slide because this is just a presentation and I'm not pitching for any money. So I appreciate your time today. If you'd like to get some more examples of pitches and then why they're bad, please check out my book. And if you need any other help or assistance, please reach out to me at timlcooley.com. Thank you.